ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะ นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Luang Por Man was one of the teachers of Luang Por Cha, our teacher. And he once said, if people could see the law of karma at work in the same way that they can see fire and water, they'd be afraid to make any bad karma, and they'd become very, very heedful. But because people don't see this, don't see the law of karma, the law of cause and effect at work, then they keep tending towards heedlessness and make all kinds of unskillful karma for themselves, which harms themselves, harms others. And the teaching of karma is very central to the practice of right view, samadhi, and our understanding of practice and how we practice and why we practice. But at the same time, it's something you have to keep coming back to question and investigate, because like any concept or term we use, we often take it on board and we know the word and we've heard it many, many times before in Buddhist circles and Buddhist teachings, to the point where we're often becoming complacent and take that word for granted as though it's something we know, we understand, but often we are still missing the workings of karma in our own life. As Luang Por Man said, you have to become clear on karma, how it's affecting you, how we're creating karma through our actions, just as we're clear on what fire and water are. We all know fire is something that's hot, has the potential to burn and destroy. And you learn that lesson very quickly in life as a kid, so you never really need to relearn the lesson. You know it. Once you've been burnt or you're aware of the danger of fire, the risk of fire, then you generally have learned that lesson for life. And similarly with water, although perhaps water is a little less obvious, but still, it's dangerous to us. We can drown in just a few inches of water. People can drown. Water can flood and destroy, and so on. But generally, through your life, you become more and more familiar with fire, heat, and water. So you know that what they are and their potential. Also know their uses as well, but also know the risks. And we have to put the same amount of time and interest to examine karma, the workings of karma, because they are there for us to find out about in our lives. And this is a teaching of cause and effect, that our actions have consequences. What determines the kind of karma we're making? Well, it depends on the intention behind the action, what we call cetana. So good intention is making good karma. Unwholesome, unskillful intention is making bad karma. Good karma is generating the causes for happiness, benefit for us, for others. Bad karma is generating the causes for suffering, pain, suffering, unpleasant, unhappy results for us, for others. But of course there are grades of karma in the sense that depending on the strength of the intention and also other surrounding conditions that may add to the whole experience. Sometimes karma is just very minor, like a thought that we just dwell on for a while and then it passes and fades from our mind. Sometimes karma is very strong and powerful because it leads on to speech, actions which may have consequences for the rest of our life. And indeed the Buddha pointed out maybe for many lives in the future. Both good and bad karma. It doesn't even just stop. The results of that karma we make doesn't even just stop when we die. It's what propels the mind into its fresh birth. As long as we are still attached to a sense of self, the delusion of self, then karma is what propels us into good and bad destinations at the time we die. So it's central to the Buddhist teachings, and it's something that we have to keep returning to examine and familiarize ourselves with and look at in our own lives and learn. Sometimes they talk about bad karma as being heavy. They say every time you dwell on an unwholesome and unskillful state of mind intentionally with volition, it starts to add this feeling of heaviness to the mind. And if it leads us into speech and action, rooted in the unskillful roots of bad karma are greed, anger and delusion. As it leads us into speech actions, then that heaviness increases, and we have to carry around the feeling of heaviness as we face the consequences of that negative karma. Maybe just the feeling of regret when we realize what we've done or remember. Sometimes it's consequences that involve other people trying to harm us, get back at us. Sometimes it's just misfortune that arises in our life as a result of past unskillful karma, and the feeling of heaviness just gets heavier and heavier. Particularly with repeated action, what we call habitual karma. So habitual negative or unwholesome karma is increasing this feeling of heaviness, the weight on our mind. And we sometimes say that, don't we? Say, I feel weighed down by the burden of my thoughts and my memories, painful memories, feelings of guilt, regret of what we've said and done, perhaps. Good karma is the opposite. It feels light, and it lightens the burden of our mind, and it lightens the feeling and even the attachment to the body. So rather than keep feeling ever more weighed down by the rocks, the heavy rocks we're carrying around from all these regrets and negative memories and unskillful intentions we might be holding on to, good karma is more like, I tend to compare it to the little bubbles that we blow when we're kids. We get the mixture of soapy water or whatever and a little plastic ring, and we blow bubbles as a game. And it's fun to watch bubbles blow up into the sky, float around, and you can pop them. And it seems a very harmless, enjoyable activity for kids. And the good karma we make is a bit like that. It lightens the mind, removes the heaviness, or at least we're not creating any more heaviness for us. And this is something we're observing, particularly in the practice of meditation, the effect our thoughts and intentions have on the mind, the conditioning effect, but also learning from our experience, often through remembering our past experience and seeing karma at work, cause and effect at work in our speech, our actions, how we are relating to the world around us, to the environment, to people, and then back to ourselves, and observing over time karma at work. And everybody has learnt some lessons. They might not use the terminology as karma, but they're observing lessons in their life, and you learn what brings you suffering on some levels and what brings you happiness on some levels. But the Buddhist path is giving us the skills and the knowledge to really investigate karma up to the very highest level. The karma that we say leads to the end of karma, or liberation from the whole process of karma. And that's what the Eightfold Noble Path is. This is you might say, the best kind of karma that humans can develop in their lives. Develop sila, samadhi, panya, train their minds in that. And ultimately this leads to liberating the mind from making further karma. So they say a liberated one, an arahant, makes no more karma in the world. While they're still alive and they have their 5 khandhas, they still receive the fruits of old karma, but they're no longer attached to their 5 khandhas with a sense of self, so they're no longer making any more karma, good or bad. But the understanding of karma, cause and effect, or that our actions have consequences, it's such a useful teaching that many people who wouldn't call themselves Buddhists can use, at least on one level, use this concept to help them in their lives, to help understand a bit better why things happen, where some of our suffering comes from, where some of our success and happiness comes from. And the Buddhist explanation is it comes through our own actions, our own karma, our own cetana, or intention. And some people will keep attributing the good and bad things that happen to them to the will of a god or the gods, other beings, or some supernatural being, supernatural force maybe. But the Buddha encouraged us to observe and examine our own 5 khandhas all the time, develop mindfulness and insight into their nature, and this helps us see karma at work more closely, to see our own karma, the type of karma we're making from moment to moment through our day as we make decisions and do things. But also to giving us insight into the selfless, you might say the selfless nature of the law of karma. Ultimately, there's no being who's in charge, determining who's responsible, who's going to be rewarded, who's going to be punished. Although the unenlightened mind tends to think that way, we're always looking for someone to blame or attribute our suffering to, and even our success to. We say, the gods are on my side today because everything's going well, or the gods are ignoring me, or they've left me today because things are going badly. We say that, don't we? How much we believe it, well, that's again for us as individuals to investigate the basis for our own beliefs and attachments and views about the world and about life. But by examining our own 5 khandhas, and particularly the Sankhara khandha, where you're seeing karma at work in a very close way, then we come to see this law of cause and effect, and the nature of unwholesome thoughts and intentions is that they're accompanied by unpleasant feeling, and they lead us to more delusion, more attachment, more suffering. Whereas the skillful thoughts that we make the effort to cultivate in the practice lead us out of suffering. They lead to more wholesome states, lead on to ever more wholesome states, brightening the mind, more mindfulness, more wisdom, and gradually a reduction of our attachments and craving that manifests as greed, anger, delusion. It's another way we determine what is good and bad karma. If it's leading to a reduction in greed, anger and delusion, then that's usually the effect of good karma, cultivating wholesome states of mind and putting them into action, speech and action, as well as mental action. There's one way you could describe the Buddhist path, or what the Buddhists do when non-Buddhists ask, what do Buddhists do? Well, they're cultivating this eightfold path, they're cultivating the karma that is reducing the presence of greed, anger and delusion in their mind, till ultimately those qualities, what we call kilesas, mental defilements, are gone. That's the goal. And when practice is not going well, it's usually a sign that our efforts have declined, or we maybe have become so distracted that we're not putting any effort into at all, and greed, anger and delusion are increasing. And particularly ignorance and delusion are the hardest things to remove from the mind because they're deluding. So with relation to karma, sometimes we think we're making good karma when we're not. Occasionally even you might look at someone, not usually yourself, but sometimes someone else may appear to be making bad karma, but they might actually be making good karma. With parents teaching their kids or guiding their children, sometimes they have to be firm and prevent their kids from doing something harmful out of compassion and out of an understanding that that action will harm their kid. So they tell the child, don't do that. And the child is disappointed and may say, oh, that's bad karma, but it's not. If it's coming from wisdom and understanding, it may be just from a more mature mind that sees the danger of a certain course of action. I started to understand that when I was a kid, when a friend of mine, when we were walking along the road, a busy road, and we're going to cross the road, and I stepped out before my friend, and it was on a corner, a curve in the road, and I didn't see an oncoming car, and I was about to walk into its path. It was travelling very fast, and my friend pulled me back by my neck, and it really hurt. So I turned. I was going to say, what did you do that for? But he just pointed and said, car, car, car. So what appeared to be a friend just, having fun at my expense or hurting me was actually saving my life. So it was good karma, but it appeared like bad karma. And we do that. Other people do that. We do that. Sometimes good karma appears as bad karma. Probably more often, bad karma is appearing as good karma. Our indulgences and the things we like, our bad habits and things that we just keep doing, that we often have a good excuse for. I need this, I need that. We have a whole armory of excuses for making bad karma, but dressing it up as good karma. But sometimes it's subtle, isn't it? Subtle kinds of bad karma, dressed up as good karma, helping people, but really with some ulterior motive. When people want something from you, often they do small acts of kindness for you, but really they want something bigger for themselves that they're not yet owning up to or letting you see. You see that all the time in the world. People have got their hidden agendas, and or we ourselves also. Sometimes we're not fully honest with ourselves. So the study of our intention and the Sankhara Khanda is where you start to unravel some of this, and through the practice and development of mindfulness and then investigation, contemplation. Sometimes we have to own up to painful truths. So we want to help somebody, but we're actually wanting something back from them when we help them. And at first we don't realize it or don't admit it, but through continued practice, we have to admit finally, oh, that was right, and maybe we have to let go. Maybe sometimes don't even help somebody because we know we are really helping them for the wrong reasons, or trying to help them for the wrong reasons. So there are many layers of karma and many intensities of karma. There's small acts of unskillful karma, and then very heavy acts, small acts of good karma, and then very heavy or powerful acts of good karma. So as I was mentioning earlier, the meditation is a very powerful good karma when practiced sincerely and we develop mindfulness. In moments of mindfulness, however hard it is to bring up mindfulness, it's very powerful good karma because it's conditioning your mind. And one moment of mindfulness makes a second and a third moment easier. You notice when you practice meditation, you put forth effort just to bring up mindfulness when you have many distracting thoughts or you're feeling tired and sleepy, but you keep putting that effort in to establish mindfulness. And it can often seem like very hard work. And the moments of mindfulness at first are just very occasional. You have a few moments where you have clarity and awareness, and then the mind goes back to sleepiness or gets stuck into its trains of thought. Ajahn Chah used to say it's like turning a tap on. You just get, at the beginning, just a few drips of water. But if you keep turning the tap, or you keep putting the effort in, well, those drips join up and become a continuous flow. And the more you open the tap, then the greater the flow of water. The more you put effort into bringing up mindfulness, the more that mindfulness will condition further moments of mindfulness, make it easier, make the mind more habituated to becoming mindful and bringing up mindfulness until you get a stream of it, and that's what we call samadhi. Very powerful, good, resultant karma. There's many factors which are good karma and supportive of good karma in our life. So one of them is associating with Kalyana Mitta, good friends. So particularly Sangha, people who have committed themselves to the practice of Dhamma Vinaya, developing mindfulness and insight for the purification of their mind. And what we call a field of merit. Why do we call Sangha a field of merit? It's because the seeds that are planted in that field tend to grow well and tend to grow, whereas a person without sila, who's not committed to developing themselves in a good way, well, it's a bit more like barren earth. The seeds planted often don't ripen, don't give fruit. So associating with Kalyana Mitta, and particularly Sangha, is a great cause for the development of good karma, because you get good example, you get good teachings, you get the right kind of supportive conditions. Maybe not the only good supportive conditions in the world, but it's one of the best. And you see over time how people who maybe become monks and nuns themselves, or just associate with monks and nuns over many, many years, the fruits come back to them over and over again. The dana that they do bears great fruit. The physical dana, the material dana, building monasteries, providing food for Sangha, bears fruit over and over again. And the Buddha said it will bear fruit not just for one life, but for many lifetimes. Associating with people who have sila, who live in a moral way, who are practicing harmlessness and don't take advantage and exploit others. Being associated with them, supporting them, being in their presence. Again, some of that rubs off on us. There's many ways our karma improves. Our skillful intentions are encouraged by other people's skillful intentions. I always remember a story of a husband and wife who supported monks all their life and had great faith, but as people find sometimes in their lives, they still have their own attachments and mental defilements which are sometimes stimulated, and they got into an argument because the wife was getting too close to another man, and the husband was very possessive of his wife, and he couldn't stop her seeing this other man or talking about him or thinking about him, so he's getting very upset, and his possessiveness of his wife led to him getting so angry. One day they had a very violent, aggressive outburst and argument, shouting at each other. You might say it was a crunch point in their marriage. And the man got so angry, he actually pulled out a loaded gun to threaten his wife. Deep down you might say through love and attachment, but because of his delusion, he's becoming aggressive. But at that moment there was such a kerfuffle, there was so much grabbing the gun and the sort of disturbance of the two people arguing and moving around, that the picture of their teacher, Lumpur Anand, fell off the wall in the middle of the argument. And both of them froze and saw this picture falling down to the ground, and it meant because they'd already had a store of good karma, their faith and hearing the Dhamma and practicing the Dhamma for many years, that brought all the goodness up at that moment. You could say it was a moment they're about to drop into hell, and it just stopped them arguing, and the man put the gun away and realised what a mistake he had made. Just by seeing the monk fall off the wall, it's like, the goodness is falling from the mind as an image, a very obvious image at that moment. So their good karma protected them, particularly the man, and also the woman who decided what the husband was saying made sense, and she was cut off the guy that she was talking to too much. You see that all the time as a Buddhist monk, the way the Sangha, the influence of the Sangha helps people sometimes to straighten up their sila, or to straighten up their views and understanding, and encourage them in the right course of action at a time where maybe they're tempted to go in the wrong way, follow their greed, follow their anger or their wrong views, or just give up faith in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha altogether sometimes. It's the Bharami and the goodness of the Sangha can bring up good things for lay people. Over and over again you see that. There's another story someone was telling me a while ago about Lumpur Kamma, who was a teacher who came to us a few years ago for the Katina. When he was a young monk, he was walking Tudong with a novice. He left Ajahn Chah to go walking on the Thai-Laotian border. And as monks do, they go walking in the forest, just carrying a few simple possessions, their bowl and robes, and never quite sure where they're going to sleep, who's going to help them, where they're going to get their food. But living with that uncertainty is a good kind of karma. It's keeping one's precepts strictly, not bothering anyone, but just letting conditions take their course. It's a good kind of karma of letting go of attachment to material comfort, to all the worries about the future, the body, the mind, where the next meal will come from. It's a conscious letting go. So it's a very powerful good karma for the monks when they do that. And they were wandering along the Laotian border, going through very sparsely populated country, few villages, and what villages they came in contact with were very poor. But nevertheless, they carried on with their walk, and they'd heard about one cave in one area they entered, and they wanted to go and find this cave to stay in and practice maybe. They got to the nearest village and asked the villagers, "Oh, we've heard there's this cave on a hill nearby. Do you know where it is?" And the village headman was very concerned for them, for their well-being, because they didn't know the area, and there was wild animals in those days. There were a lot of elephants on the Laotian-Thai border, which were quite aggressive. And the village headman said, "Well, okay, we'll take you tomorrow. We'll show you where it is. We don't want you to just head off now. You might get lost or you meet wild animals." And at first, Lumpur Kamma was keen to just keep going. But he thought, maybe I should just heed the local knowledge of the village headman and just wait for a night. So they waited on the edge of the village for a night. The next day they headed off, and they reached an area just below the cave, and they found one little hut. The way Thai farmers, they build these huts in their rice fields so that they can clear the land, grow rice, and look after their land. And they're just simple wooden or bamboo huts with grass roofs, but actually function as homes. And there was one there, and it had been completely destroyed. They reckoned probably elephants, but they couldn't see any elephants, but they had been completely destroyed. So they walked past, and they went up to the cave, which is about 300 meters higher, and they found a couple there, a middle-aged couple, sitting in the cave, and they were totally distraught. And they said, well, what happened to you? And they said, well, the last week or so there's been another meditation monk, forest monk, had been staying in this cave, and we were feeding him every day. He'd come down for alms to our little house. And then yesterday he told us, when he was receiving food in the morning, he said, come up to the cave this afternoon about 3 o'clock. Make sure you come, it's really important. I'll be leaving on my travels after that, so you've got to come up. And there's going to be more monks coming, and you have to look after them and meet them here at the cave. And this couple were surprised with this news. They're wondering, how did he know other monks were coming, and why is he getting us up to their cave, up to his cave? But anyway, they had great faith in the monks, so they took him up. They took up his instruction, and in the afternoon, after their work, they went up to the cave, and they found the monk had gone. There's just the cave there. But as they were there, sitting in the cave, a herd of elephants came by below, near where their little house was, and the lead elephant was a huge elephant with big tusks, and it completely destroyed the house. And they could see it from above. On the hillside, they could see this very angry elephant destroy their house, everything they had. But it didn't come up to the cave, and eventually it left. And they told Lumpur Kam, they said, we're so grateful this monk told us to come up to the cave. If we had stayed at home, we'd have probably been killed. And Lumpur Kam said, well, why would the elephants be after you, after your house? Why are they so destructive? And the man admitted, he said, well, about 10 years ago when I was younger, I had a gun, and when I first moved to this area to clear the forest for my fields, I met this elephant, this huge male bull elephant with huge tusks, and I thought, it would be worth a bit of money if I could capture this elephant. So I tried to capture it, and during my attempt I shot at it to try and wound it so I could tie it down, and I shot it in the eye, made it blind in one eye, and ever since then it had a grudge against me, and a few times it had chased me in the forest, but because it was blind in one eye I could always run away on the blind side of it and get away. But this time I didn't know they were coming, and if I'd been down there it would have killed me for sure, because it was seeking revenge. But luckily the monk had told me to come up here, so I got away. And out of compassion for the lay people, Lumpur Kam and the novice said, we're not going to stay here tonight, you can have the cave, we'll go on and stay in the forest. And they carried on their journey and left the couple. It's a very simple story, but the sort of story you hear all the time or encounter all the time, particularly in Thailand, but other places where monks practice. On the advice of a monk, people manage to get out of trouble or stay out of trouble. And this happens all the time, you see, as monks, advice that people get. Sometimes it's advice about protection or just changing a decision, changing a course of action. And the goodness of supporting Sangha, being close to Sangha, helps the person. People are often asking monks, how can I improve my karma? They tend to always, if they're not blaming a superior being for all their bad luck, they tend to be blaming themselves from a past life. So they say, oh, it's all my bad karma from last life. I didn't get the job, I failed the exam, having arguments with people, I've got bad health, always blaming something they must have done in past life. But the real place we're making karma is in the present moment. We are receiving the fruits of our old karma all the time, of course, coming back to us. But that's only one factor in the whole picture. More important is what we're doing with our mind and the decisions we're making from moment to moment through our day. Even when we're facing bad karma or the old negative karma coming up, the unpleasant memories that come up and the unpleasant moods we get into from remembering past actions, or literally unpleasant situations we get in with other people or events that happen, they may be a certain amount of past karma coming up at that time, but how we deal with it, depends on what we're doing with our mind right now in the present. And the most important thing is to be developing good karma, developing the path in the present, which is giving you all the right supportive conditions and the right qualities to deal with any misfortune that comes your way. And you see this all the time with people who say when they do get sick and they're in hospital, people who practice the Dhamma and have an understanding about making good karma, and maybe they've learned to meditate, they've learned to practice developing kindness and compassion to others, they develop gratitude, all the wholesome kind of qualities that they develop support them in that time, say when they're in hospital suffering. Whereas people have no foundation in practice, they maybe don't understand about karma, or they don't know how to develop good karma, are often floundering and suffering, and they're not only dealing with the physical suffering of their illness or their injury, but also they're dealing with the mental suffering because of the attachment to the body and that feeling of misfortune, which just drags the mind down, and they get caught into more negative thoughts, feeling sorry for themselves, blaming the world, and so on. So how we deal with the ups and downs of life, misfortunes, the arising of past bad karma, well, partly depends on what kind of karma we're making right now, from moment to moment, day to day. And that's why we have to keep putting effort into the practice, keep creating the causes and conditions for new good karma, practicing generosity, keeping the precepts, developing mindfulness, contemplating the Dhamma, listening to the Dhamma. Because we still have a store of kilesa, mental defilements, affecting us all the time. Greed, anger and delusion are being stimulated. And we don't quite know when they really will be stimulated, and anger will take over our mind, or greed will take over the mind and lead us into an unskillful course of action. So the practice of developing good karma, and particularly supporting Sangha, listening to the Dhamma, staying close to Sangha, is, as I said, it's a powerful kind of good karma which helps to protect you in different situations and lead you in the right direction even when misfortune comes your way. Monks, particularly staying in the forest, understand this point because they really only have their good karma and development of new good karma to rely on. When you go into the forest, practice in the forest, you have very little in terms of material possessions or protection. You don't have weapons, you don't have people around to kind of protect you from all the difficulties of life. You're just relying on your own good karma, your own state of mind, your own sila. So they understand this point very well. When you go through the forest traveling, or when you're just living in the forest, you're constantly coming back to the practice of your sila, developing the wholesome intention not to harm others, even animals, and developing kindness and compassion as good karma. And this has a certain protective power to it. Keeps you out of trouble, or if you meet with trouble, it tends not to overwhelm you or harm you. I remember a few years ago, Luang Por Liam was staying here, and we got the news that a monk in Thailand had been killed by a tiger in the forest, which is very rare. Monks quite regularly meet wild animals in the forest, but very rarely do they get hurt or let alone killed. And he said, well, it's probably a case of the monk not keeping his precepts, not keeping his sila, that's happened. And we found out later by asking people who knew what had happened that they said, yes, this monk didn't keep the rules of monks. So they say your rules are your decoration when you go into the forest, your rules of training in harmlessness, not taking advantage of others, not being aggressive, being patient with people and animals are your protection. They decorate you, as it were. It's what you've got to rely on in the forest. Another story, Luang Por Supha, that monk, 118-year-old monk who died a few years ago, he had many, many stories from the times he was in the forest. And he told the story of when he was coming back into Thailand, having walked from China. He's walking into Laos, which in those days, like 100 years ago, very, very sparsely populated, very little development. Few roads, few villages, no electricity. He was walking back to Thailand, but he had to cross Laos, which is a few hundred kilometers of thick forest, and he didn't know the way for sure, and he actually got lost in the forest. For a week he hadn't eaten, he hadn't encountered people, so he hadn't eaten for a week. He could drink because there was streams, but he didn't have food, so he was getting very weak, skinny. And he said that on the 7th day of not eating but walking every day to try and get out of the forest, he sat down and meditated and decided maybe this is going to be where he dies because he doesn't know where to go. He's dedicated his life to the practice of the Dhamma for Nibbana. If there's any good karma, good causes and conditions left in his life, may it happen, may it come to fruition at that point, because he's basically at the end of his time. He thought he couldn't survive it. And that day he was meditating, a group of elephants had turned up in the forest near him. And at first, because they were suspicious, they were acting aggressively towards him. But then one of the elephants came to the front of the group and pushed the others away, kind of stuck itself between him and the herd of elephants so that they couldn't hurt him, and was pushing them away so they'd go and feed in another part of the forest so the monk would be protected. And then this one strong male elephant just stayed there near him, almost like as a kind of bodyguard. So Luang Por Supha said, the results of good karma, the bodyguard came along, protected me at that time from the herd of elephants, which can be very aggressive. And so he made a further adhitthana in his meditation. If I have the good karmic causes, and if you, talking to the elephant, you want to make good karma to improve your life, may you lead me out to the forest. So he made that wish, and he had a very powerful mind. He had good samadhi, good jhana, and he made that wish. And later on, that elephant started walking. And being at the end of his tether, the monk, Luang Por Supha, thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. So he started following the elephant, which walked alone, leaving the other elephants through the forest. So he just carried on following it for many hours, until he came to a clearing where he could see the results of human activity. And he thought, this must be near a village. Following the fields, I'll be able to find people and get some help, get some food. So he walked into the fields and the elephant stopped on the edge of the forest. So he turned around and he realized, the elephant's not going to go any further because normally they're careful of humans. They're not going to follow him into the village. So he gave the elephant a blessing, as monks do when they've received support of any kind, even from an elephant. He gave the elephant a blessing and made another vow. He said, may the good karma you've made today, helping me out of the forest, saving my life, may this be a cause for you to attain human rebirth. And they separated. At that point, the elephant went back into the forest. Luang Por Supha went on and found a village and got help, got food, and then eventually got back to Thailand. But Luang Por Supha lived to the age of 118, so many, many years later, the happy ending of that story was that one day he was in his monastery in Phuket, which many people know. They've been on holiday to Thailand, they know Phuket Island. It's a tourist destination. Luang Por used to live there on a hill, a monastery called Wat Khao Noi. And one day, many years later, a young man walked into the monastery asking to ordain as a monk. And Luang Por told his other monks in the monastery, he said, this is that elephant. He's been reborn as a human and now he's back here asking to ordain under me as a teacher. So it's like a completion of that story. The elephant must have died, me reborn as a human. This is the result of helping Sangha. So karma has its result in this life and in future lives. Staying close to Sangha, supporting Sangha, listening to the Dhamma, keeping precepts, offering dana, meditating. All of this is powerful good karma, and it's that acceptance of karma. Maybe at first it's just an acceptance based on belief, but through practice, gradually one's mind opens up to see, well, it's at work, isn't it? How you treat yourself, how you treat others has results, brings results back to you. How you look after your mind, the kind of words you use as you engage with others, the kind of actions you do as you engage with others has its results, has its consequences, good and bad. So you have these teachings, how you treat other people in the same way you wish to be treated. If you hurt other people, well, don't be surprised if you get hurt. If you're kind to others and help others, then it's quite likely you'll get helped when the time comes. One of the monks was telling me today, his parents, it was a good weather day, they're out walking this afternoon, and they're walking past a clinic which was closing up for the day, and the clinic, one of the nurses rushed out and said, oh, we haven't used all our COVID vaccines up today. Would you like a vaccination now? You don't need to book, you can have one right now. So they said, yeah, okay. So they got their COVID vaccine without having to book, go through any paperwork, waiting queue, worry about when they're going to get the vaccine. It just happened. Maybe that's the good karma they've made in their lives. Things just happen, don't they, sometimes? Situations that come along where people help us, good things can happen. So some of our karma is coming through from the past, maybe past lives or this life. But how we are looking after our mind and the kind of karma we're making right now is the most important thing. This is the Paccuppanna Dhamma. What kind of karma are you making today? How are you treating yourself? What are you putting effort into improving your life today? And the framework we use for that is practicing the Dhamma, the Eightfold Noble Path, in all the different factors of it. So a very simple way to boost your practice if you're getting into trouble as you meditate, you find your practice is floundering, you're losing faith, losing effort, losing energy, contemplate the karma that you're making and set your mind on making more good karma. And then take the time to investigate what is good karma. What kinds of good karma am I making? Often we are not even aware of the good karma we're making, because we kind of take things for granted, or we just go through life not really reflecting very much on our actions. Why can we live in the world, say in this place, in this country, at this time, fairly safely, reasonably safely? It's because you haven't made the karma to be born in a place where there's a war or a famine or a terrible drought or disaster. You have good supportive conditions at this time in your life. And that's something to reflect on, right? Sometimes we don't realize the good qualities we have in our mind. You're probably very unlikely to kill anyone in this life. Even if occasionally you get very angry with someone, you're unlikely to kill anyone. Why? Because you naturally have already developed a sense of karma and the consequences of karma around killing. Certainly with human beings, you're unlikely to kill anyone because you have that sense. That's a very heavy, bad karma. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. You'd have to really push me to kill someone. Probably everyone has that. So you're making the karma of not killing and consciously not killing every day. That's good karma. How strong the intention is, well, that's something for you to investigate. But it's one of the kinds of good karma you make every day. You're not killing, not stealing, not hurting others through your behavior, perhaps. That's good karma, that it's bringing its own good results. But often we forget it, don't we? We get distracted or caught up in other aspects of life. So it's often a simple reflection to bring up, what kind of karma am I making today or right now? And then to adjust accordingly. If we notice we're dwelling on unskillful intentions in the mind, some kind of greed, anger, well, do your best to abandon those negative intentions with wisdom, with clarity, so you know why you're abandoning them. You know they're the cause of pain and suffering, they're the cause of bad karma, so you're consciously abandoning them, and you use the strength of your good karma, the mindfulness, the understanding, the clarity you have, the hiriyottapa, that sense of shame and fear of wrongdoing, these kind of qualities you develop, you use them to protect yourself from your own tendency to make bad karma, if that's coming up. Little by little, you purify your mind this way. If you get in the habit of making good karma habitually, it becomes habitual good karma. Well, you don't have to worry what's going to happen when you die, because you've been making habitual good karma through your life. That's going to come up at the end, unless you've got any really, really heavy bad karma. But most people don't. So the habitual good karma you've been making is going to carry on fruition, giving its fruition even at the end of your life. And that might be one goal for you. What do you see as the goal in life? Well, a peaceful death might be one goal. Dying without regret, without guilt and remorse, without all the confusion of extreme thoughts rooted in greed, anger and delusion. That might be a goal you could set yourself. A higher goal would be nibbana. Just no more attachment at all, no more karma making at all. Maybe for the moment I'll leave the talk there and just leave it as an offering for your reflection.